So, hi everyone. Thank you, Dean, Katie, for the introductions, and thank you to some Ontario Masters for having me here. I'm really very excited to speak to all of you about strength and conditioning for swimmers, and even more importantly, for individuals who are active for life. And so, any questions that you have, you can put them in the chat box, or you can kind of raise your hand and I'll address them. I know Dean mentioned there were some questions, so I did incorporate some of them. And if I've missed any, we can address them at the end or even offline as well. Okay, so let's get into it here. Okay, so a little bit about my story. I'm just going to minimize this here. So a little bit about my story. I know Dean mentioned a little bit here. So obviously, like all of us playing sports when we were younger, mine was soccer along with some other sports, main one being soccer, obviously. And I went on to Wilfrid Laurier University, played soccer there for 4 years. And then after the 4 years, after my literally the last game and kind of the couple months after that, I felt like a big hole or emptiness in where I was at in kind of my athletic career, I guess you'd call it. And so, kind of knowing that my career was over, I didn't really have any intentions of maybe playing professional or expanding that even further. I kind of felt like a big void at that point. So, kind of Olympic weightlifting was always, or strength training was always in my background. I had always done it compared to my teammates before. So Olympic weightlifting was something that I continued on after university. So, and I made it to provincials within my first year. So I was very lucky to have a sport that I was training for and something that I really enjoyed and had that competitiveness that that soccer always gave me as well. And then I also went on to University of Toronto to complete my master's of professional kinesiology there. That program was very much a practical based, course based program. So I did placements. My main one was with the Varsity Blues. So I worked with a number of teams there, one of which was the men's football team, teaching them Olympic weightlifting. So imagine myself, female coaching about 20, 30 male big guys in that room, in that gym space, which was a really rewarding experience for me. And I learned a ton from that, which I really enjoyed. And I definitely got the respect from everybody that was very welcoming. So that kind of boosted me a little bit, and that confidence in the weight room and my coaching experience as well. So since 2017, I've started my own business as well, where I'm providing personal training services or strength and conditioning services, as well as programming. Obviously, right now with the pandemic, everything is virtually, and hopefully we get to a point where I can coach in person again. But I've kept everything online, and again, Zoom, Zoom calls, personal training sessions over Zoom have been the majority of my life, a little bit, along with working at CSIO for the past couple months. And then, as Dean mentioned, I also work for the Canadian Sport Institute Ontario. 2 years ago now, I started with the Ontario Swimming Academy, and I've been very fortunate to work with Don Burton and Amber Hutchinson as my colleagues there, and really grateful for picking up, learning a new sport, that very minimal experience before, and very jumping into it head first, and really getting to know the sport. So I feel really fortunate to work with individuals like Dean and everybody else at the OSA and Swim Ontario. And then also the past couple months since July, I've also started working with the High Performance Center with Ben Titley's group, and that's been another advancement along in the swimming world. And I think really grateful for kind of the opportunities that that have occurred through CSIO. Through at CSIO, I've also worked with national sport snowboarding, provincial alpine ski, and I'm also working with the couple athletes of the national fencing team. So they've qualified also for Tokyo 2021 as a team. So the ladies there. So I'm working closely with an athlete, Eleanor Harvey, leading into Tokyo next year. So that's a little bit about my story, just to give a bit of who I am. And so we'll get into the main topic here. So dryland training. So can be split up into kind of my role been the pre-swim or pre-pool activation, and strength and conditioning, like in the weight room. So the pre-swim activation, I'll be going over tonight the importance and the components of an activation, and then within the strength and conditioning realm of things, going into a bit of core, and some considerations for programming, either for at home or in the gym. And you'll also see a lot of overlap between the two kind of roles that I play in. You'll see some of the concepts from activation will also apply to strength and conditioning as well. So a big part of my kind of coaching framework the past couple years has been keep it simple. And so being able to master those simple movements and doing the simple things right and doing them really, really well. And so throughout my career, I've always seen something on Instagram or whatever the next biggest thing is, training philosophy or program or whatever that is, try to implement it, maybe not get the same results or different, or and then always coming back to that keep it simple framework. And that's not just strength and conditioning, it's sleeping well. Are you getting 8 hours of sleep? Are you eating proper foods? Are you recovering well? Are you doing your stretching, your mobility? Just those simple things that if you can accomplish, that you'll progress really well in your athletic or even in your everyday life as well. So hopefully when you come across see some of the things here tonight, hopefully keeping it simple is the theme among everything here. Okay, so talking about preparation, warm up. So muscle is like a car. If you want it to run early in the morning, you have to warm it up. So again, this quote, I know that probably everybody here does, hopefully, a type of warm up here when they get in the water. But I also want to introduce to you the Dryland warm up, the pre-pool activation. And so obviously preparation, activation is about preparing the body systems for subsequent performance, whether that's in a competition setting or a training setting, by stimulating the physical and the mental sides of the body here. So just a kind of a quick understanding of where everyone's at. If you want to put in the chat box, like how do you warm up? Either that could be on dry land or in the water. If you want to just take like 30 seconds here and just type in what you got. Let's see it. Or what you do right now. How do I go back here? Oops. I can't see my chat. Oh, there we go. Okay. I got it. There we go. Awesome. In the water, active stretch before getting the pool, in the water, and jump in the pool. Yep. 300 free today. Nice. Okay. Great. In the water. Easy. Before. Okay. Good. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to go back here. Okay. Awesome. So thank you for kind of contributing. And so it's good to know like where everyone is at, and hopefully I can introduce a few concepts that maybe just changing a few things or adding in a few things, keeping it simple, and seeing how maybe your performance in the water, in a training setting, in a competition setting, how that changes. So try and keep an open mind here tonight and see if you can incorporate anything that we've learned. So to start out, we'll be going over the components of a pre-pool activation. So there are 3 components. So raise, activate, prime / power. So the raise, obviously we want to raise the body temperature, which I'll get into detail each component here. Activate or select exercises that target the upper body and shoulders, the core or the midline. The core is our front and back, which I'll get into detail as well. And then the lower body as well. And then finally, the prime or power side of things is priming the nervous system, central nervous system, for those powerful block starts, push-offs off the wall. And so that component is a little bit more specific, and I'll explain the components or some exercises that you can incorporate as well. And if you're not doing it pre-pool activation, just start with even 10 minutes. And ideally, if you can get 15, 25 minutes, I know with everything going on right now, that might be very limited. But if you can find ways that to incorporate, that would be great. If it's in person, or sorry, on the spot, that would be great as well. So obviously we want to improve that range of motion, get the blood flowing, raise our body temperature, maybe incorporate some rehab exercises as well, maybe provided by your physio, and as well prime the nervous system here. Okay, so the first part, raise. Obviously, it's in the name. We want to raise that body temperature, our core temperature, get the blood flowing, and just make the subsequent parts a little bit easier following the raise component. So some examples: skipping, run, bike, row. If you have an erg neck close by to the pool, perfect. But these are just some examples. Skipping is a most common example that we do just because it takes minimal space, and you can do it on the spot. You can also jog on the spot too. Again, only 5 to 10 minutes you need for this component of the activation. So you want to make sure you're increasing your intensity, your speed throughout the 5 to 10 minutes. So generally maybe 15 to 30 seconds, every 15 to 30 seconds, try and increase that intensity or speed to get yourself to a light sweat and a little bit increase in your breathing rate as well. Okay. So the next component is the activate, and the first part is the upper body. So obviously swimming takes a toll a lot on the upper body with all the pulling that we have to do. So the point of this section is to increase the range of motion of the soft tissues and the rotator cuff muscles and the scapula, which is the shoulder blades that are needed for pulling and for streamlined positions. We want to increase the shoulder durability. So we know, like I said, it takes a toll on the shoulders and upper back. So if we can incorporate just a few exercises before we get in, right, we're putting the joint, the soft tissues, the muscles in that range of motion before we actually get into streamline. So maybe if you don't do some type of dryland warm up before you get in, and it may take a couple of streamlines in order to get to an optimal streamlined position. So if we can work that range of motion beforehand and increase that range of motion, then the better off we'll have a better start to either pulling or into our strokes into the streamlined position as well. And so just incorporating those couple of exercises that can increase that range of motion before every swim session, if you're able to, will go a long way for you. So I think there was one question about saving achy shoulders. So a combo of strengthening, mobility, rehab work from your physio. The key here is movement. So we think that, we need to rest. I would say that's probably the last resort, but movement for especially soft tissues like muscles, joints, it likes movement. We like to move, right? So that's kind of the biggest advice that I have for that maybe for someone complaining of achy shoulders. Again, might have to seek a physio for that because that's a little bit more into that scope. But just something to keep in mind that our bodies love movement, okay? And so we can also use a combo of banded exercise or tubing, body weight, mobility. So like foam rolling, you might see people get massages before they jump in the water or before a race. And so you can have a combo of these three here. And I'm going to show some exercises. So just some examples here. And maybe you've done, obviously I saw a couple people have done some exercises, some stretches. So I'll show that here. Okay, so the first one here, the top left-hand corner. So we have 5 different letters. I'll just play that here. Hopefully you can see that. So I'm laying on my stomach here. There's 5 different letters that my arms are going to be in. So Y. So each position or each letter just engages different muscle groups in the shoulder and the upper back. So this is T. I'll do a couple reps here. I's, which is kind of like a streamlined position. So straight up overhead. Next one is W. Draw those elbows in. So again, I'm moving from that mid to upper back, engaging those rotator cuff muscles. Maybe you've done a couple. Especially if you've done physio for shoulders, you'll definitely see this in here. And then A's, kind of the start maybe of a butterfly stroke here. So again, super easy. Doesn't take a whole lot to incorporate into your pre-pool activation. And so the next one is a bit of a more mobility exercise. This is the top right hand corner. So these are called side lying openers. So again, we're trying to open up the upper back, the chest or the pecs, and the low back as well. So maybe a set of 1 to 2 and for 10 reps per side. Sorry, slow-mo. The wrong place. There you go. So again, eyes are following the fingertips, get a good rotation, opening up that upper back, increasing that range of motion. This is just a more advanced with windmills here. So some variations on that. The third one I want to show you is the mini band seated single arm row, which is the bottom left-hand corner here. So it's providing that resistance at the end range. So if you have bands, if you're able to carry it with you around. So obviously rowing, very important for swimmers to strengthen the backside of the body and the arms. And finally, band pull aparts. So this is the bottom right. So again, different kind of positions with my hands. So this is palms up. Do a couple reps here. And then I will change it up, go palms down. So again, putting the shoulder in a different position and working through that whole range of motion in the arms and upper back here. And then the last one here, I'll skip along, are diagonals. So getting that kind of diagonal line all the way through. You can see I'm getting a little bit tired in the shoulders. It's probably take 3 filming this. Okay, so some examples, and I know that I'm showing a couple movements here, but I'm sure you can think of a million other exercises that would fit this framework here. And so my goal is to provide that framework to you, and exercise selection part is the easy part of things. So once you know that framework, once you know the outline, it becomes easy just to plop exercises in there. So this is just a couple. And next component of the activate is the core. So we want to activate obviously the muscles in the core. And so when we think of the core, we immediately think of abs or the 6-pack. So, but in fact, the core is our whole torso, which you'll see in the next slide. But our torso is front, back, side to side, and from our neck all the way down to including our hips, actually. So obviously when we swim, we want to reduce the amount of drag that's on our body and optimize the body position in the water. So when we think of core, especially for swimmers and just everyday life, we want to think about the functionality of our core. So in a swimming setting, so the ability to hold a tight, streamlined position, right? And be able to reduce the amount of drag on our body, and the ability to maintain a high hip position. Obviously, especially working with swimmers a little bit more, swimming myself, I realized my core strength was not the greatest, as my hips were not very high. Felt like my legs were dropping into the water. So that was a big realization and appreciation for core work. It can also core is also important for our stroke stability and balance. So obviously when we go into our stroke, or when we kick, we want to be able to maintain that streamlined position all the way through pull or the kick here. So that's while our arms are doing crazy stuff, we want to maintain that body position all the way through. Another reason why core is important for us swimmers is optimize our pull and kicking power, right? So that our core is the transfer from our legs up and our arms down. So that transfers our core is that kind of our connection between the two. And then also it's core is also important for injury prevention, and can also be important for obviously for performance, but most importantly for life. A lot of times I hear clients and athletes bring up about back pain or yeah, especially back pain and not being able to do functional movements in their day-to-day lives. So I think that's super important, not just for in a swimming specific setting, but in a daily life functionality. So again, deep core, what I mean by that, when we think about core strength, we want to think about the deep core unit. And so those are the highlighted parts that you see in yellow there. So again, the strength of the core musculature will enable that dynamic stability and effective transfer of power throughout the body during any movement. So it's important to achieve that optimum body position and efficiency of movement, both in and out of the pool. So you can appreciate a lot that the core is not just kind of the six pack, or you see the rectus abdominis there, but it's obliques, the deep core, deep transverse abdominis here, or even our groin, and the back side, our upper back, lats, low back, glutes. We can have an appreciation for the deep core unit. So one activity that I want everyone to try out, and you don't have to do it, but I think it's kind of very basic concept of the deep core concept here is either you can be seated, so you can stay in your chair, or if you're feeling good, you can also try it in a plank position. So if you want, you can go into a plank on your hands or on your elbows and pretend like you're going to be punched in the stomach. So like Bruce Lee, pretend you're going to be punched. What are you going to do? You're going to think about bracing your core. So you can tell my voice changed by doing that. So very hard core muscles going on right now. That's the same idea that we want to engage while we're in any core exercise, right? So we're engaging those deep core muscles as well as the more superficial ones. So take a quick break if you're doing this, and then you're going to do it one more time. So deep core, brace, someone's going to punch. What are you going to do? And then I want you to try and take some deep breaths at the same time. So deep core, brace your core and try and breathe now. I can't see everybody, so hopefully you're doing it. Okay, so you can see that's just a challenge, just doing that, right? And it's the same idea when we transfer it over to the exercises that we're doing. Oops. So some core exercises here. So planks. So obviously I'm pretty sure probably everyone has done some type of plank. So again, probably can't see specifically what I'm doing in this movement, but I am bracing my core, bringing my belly button in towards my spine, holding that position. I know it's a very exciting video, but hopefully the text is helping a bit. Okay, so maintaining that nice flat back, good streamline position, body position, if you want to kind of transfer it over. Okay. The next one here, a little bit more swim specific. So a hollow body plus flutter kicks. So on my back, you can even have your hands up in streamline if you want. And then having strong legs, doing those kicks and squeezing the core the whole time. Okay, the bottom left here. So we have high plank cross body drag. This is one of my favorite movements that I will incorporate for everybody. But you can see how I'm trying to hold that plank position while my arms are moving, which is a perfect example of what you do in the water, right? So front view. So you can see my hips are not moving. My body is still. And cross body drag, place the plate. Don't even have to use a plate. You can use your water bottle, any object. I'll show it again from the side. So you can see, think about that tall glass of water on your back and you don't want to spill it. So these are the type of exercises that we want to be incorporating a little bit more, either into our activation as well as our strength and conditioning program or strength programs here. And then last one, bent leg wipers, kind of working the obliques a little bit more, as well as the low back. So if you want to make this a little bit harder, you can straighten the legs out. So keeping that core integrity the whole time, alignment, trunk control. So that's another one here. In terms of reps, I would say like either 30 to 45 seconds if maybe if you're in that intermediate stage. Again, if you're starting out, even for the plank, for example, you may have read there, I also program it for deep breaths. So I might say instead of 30 seconds, do 5 deep breaths in this position. So just putting it into context a little bit more and focusing on that quality instead of trying to make it through for 30 seconds. So the next component of the activate is the lower body. So we want to think about an emphasis on the posterior chain. So what do I mean by that? I mean the glutes, which is our bum, our hamstrings, which are essential for kicking, obviously, for starts, for push-offs, for our kicking ability. I know quads, our front of our legs are also involved in that, but the main muscle groups is our posterior chain, even low back as well. Which goes into core a little bit here. So I'll show a few exercises. So single leg glute bridge, top left here. So you can even do a double leg glute bridge. So this engages the muscles in the glutes, hamstrings, the back of the body, a little bit of core as well. Again, it's hard to categorize as just one body part because it can encompass core, lower body as well here. So even rep wise, I would say 1 to 2 sets, maybe 8 to 10 reps per side. The bottom left here, if you have a mini band that you can use, some mini band lateral steps. So again, we're working kind of the hip, muscles around the hip. Obviously essential for kicking, especially if you're doing breaststroke. And you can even do a variation of just forward and backwards. It doesn't have to be laterally as well. And then finally is the mini band squat. So what's the difference of not doing it without a band? The band forces you to push your knees out. So it provides that little bit of kind of feedback on keeping the knees out, driving them out, and engaging the glutes and the muscles around the hip just a little bit more. I have some variations in here, but just kind of controlled repetitions, I think, are important to start out with here. So again, lower body obviously starts, push-offs, and our kicking ability here. Okay, and then the final component is the prime or power section here. So this is where maybe you would incorporate some plyometrics. So plyometrics is kind of our jumps, fast explosive movements. So you can even put sprints in here, med ball slams. So the idea here is maybe a little bit more specificity in this. So for the med ball slams, for example, before working with swimming, it would just be a straight med ball slam down. But working with the athletes and the coaches as well, understanding that maybe you can even have a high elbow position. So work on some components that you would in the water as well, keeping that high elbow, getting over top of the ball and slamming down as fast as you can to mimic maybe a freestyle stroke or even a butterfly stroke here, or breaststroke pull up too. So again, I have some examples here: squat jumps. And again, that specificity, you can add a streamline at the top. So you can kind of mimic a push off or a dive. That's not streamline, obviously, but so in another one, bottom right. So med ball slam, you can just simplify it, just do the slam. So again, the med ball slams, you can reach up nice and tall, get that high elbow position, come down. You can add in the jump if you want as well. Also, I like to incorporate maybe some reaction time drills. So maybe have start in a squat position and take your marks, go jump as high as you can. So kind of work that reaction time a little bit more, make it more specific. So the idea of this component is specificity as much as you can here. Okay, so to recap, so obviously we have the raise, activate, prime / power components here. So the raise, obviously we want to increase our body temperature or increase that blood flow around the body 5 to 10 minutes, increasing our speed or intensity every maybe 15, 30 seconds. You can change if you're skipping, for example, maybe throwing some high knees or some single leg jumps, change up the footwork. Activate, so going through the upper body, core, lower body, maybe 1 to 2 sets. If you're just starting out, just try maybe 1 set. Like it doesn't have to be 3 sets to begin with. Like even 1 set, I believe you would see a significant difference in your in water performance. 8 to 12 reps or 15 to 45 seconds if you're doing any of that core work. So again, we have the upper body, core, lower body, and then finally we have the prime power. So 1 to 2 sets, keep the reps short, make it intense, max effort, 3 to 6 reps. That's all you need, and you're ready to go. Okay, so the kind of third part component of our discussion here will be around strength training. So I'll provide some considerations for programming for either in the gym or in home, from having completely nothing, just doing body weight, to all the way to a full home gym. And so hopefully that will provide a little bit of guidance for those maybe that are doing only dryland training or not and are not in the water. Along with keeping it simple, like I mentioned before, the concept of quality over quantity is also part of my coaching framework for programming and dryland programming. So quality of movement over how much weight you're lifting is more important for longevity and progressing well. Far too often I see clients, athletes, maybe rushing, putting on more weight than maybe they should be, and maybe they should take back the weight and focus a little bit more on their technique. And that's a really big proponent of like kind of my lifting career and the coaches that I've had as well. So I know that literature supports that dryland training is beneficial for swimmers, yet there's a large range of different methods, strategies, philosophies amongst coaches. And so that we know that maybe swimming is a high volume sport. And so we kind of think of swimming as endurance here. So less force sustained over a longer period of time. But in terms of what we do in the weight room, we want to think about kind of being able to maybe exploit weaknesses and develop them in the weight room. So we know that swimmers are very maybe high in our endurance capacity, right? But maybe in their strength and power capacities they're not there yet. And so our job is to kind of focus on these two in the weight room, at least kind of in my experience, especially working with the OSA where they have 9 practices a week. I think, don't get me wrong, I think endurance is important to develop, and there's a time and place for it. But I think strength and power are really big focuses of the programming that I've come across working with swimmers in the past couple years. So even further, so if we break it down and just come to these 3 here, we kind of go through 3 types of focuses. So the first one is build that strength or muscle. When I say muscle, people always say, oh, well, swimmers shouldn't be bulky. But if they are swimming a lot and they're maybe losing muscle mass or anything like that, then we want to use strength training and nutrition, obviously, to maintain some amount of muscle mass that is needed. So there is a baseline strength that we try and hit, we try and work towards. The second part is activating the muscle. So learn to use it. I know it sounds familiar, activation, to what I just said, but kind of that prime and power section here is what we want to develop. So learn to use it. So that's the central nervous system. That would be our power work. And then third is learn to use it in a specific setting. So that's the transfer over to the water or the field of play, wherever the athlete or even client is performing in. So this could look like stage 3 could look like overspeed band work, for example, in the water, or performing jumps before getting on the blocks. So we kind of go through these 3 stages maybe throughout a season here. Again, you need a relative amount of strength before you can learn how to use it, and then you need a relative amount of power in order to transfer it over to the water. So hopefully this slide helps out a little bit. So I understand not everyone has access to maybe a pool or a full gym due to the different lockdown restrictions in the province. But fortunately, there are ways that we can program to work towards your goals or maintaining some strength or developing some strength easily. So the first way, obviously, body weight, like I said, keeping it simple, quality over quantity. If you get really good at the basics, and I'll explain some fundamental movement patterns that you can do. Next is banded or tubing exercises that I see a lot of clients and athletes use. Free weights or dumbbells, kettlebells, med ball, barbell, and plates. Again, start with the body weight. You can work your way up to banded. And if you're able to invest in some free weights, that's perfect. But I think if you can get really good at body weight exercises, and I'll explain how you can even advance those a little bit more. Let's say, for example, budget, maybe not being able to invest in some extra equipment, is be creative. I can tell you that personal trainers and strength and conditioning coaches like myself have become very creative in the past couple months, and being able to use from working with clients and athletes who have very minimal equipment. And so backpack, I had working with the swim athlete a couple weeks ago that she had only her duffel bag. So I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Something heavy, a little bit heavy, provide that resistance. A broomstick or a PVC pipe, easily. A water jug. I had clients who were working with soup cans or peanut butter jars, or another one that had a vinegar jug. So even though that still provided a challenge for her. So again, you can be creative with what you have, and you can get really good with. You can progress it in the next part here. So the concept of overload progression. So we think to progress, you have to increase weight, add more weight, but we can also change up the exercise itself or progress it as well. And so the concept of overload progression is that we're continually increasing the demands on the system and to continually make those gains. And so the amount of load or resistance is providing a greater stress on the body than what it's normally accustomed to. So again, increase weight. That's one option. The tempos or pauses. Again, I can explain this maybe offline if you have any more questions about this, but maybe adding for a squat, you can add a 1-second pause at the bottom of the movement, for example. Variations would be maybe you've perfected the squat, so let's try a split squat, for example, or push-ups, or you can do, what's another one? Dumbbell bench press instead of a push-up. So flip around, do some bench press, for example. So there's a lot of variations, progressions that you can use to provide that overload progression stimulus to there. The next one is programming reps and sets. So that's one question I get a lot, is how many sets, reps should I be doing? Again, it's hard to answer the question, not knowing where you're coming from, but generally 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 10 reps. If you're just starting out, even starting with 2 sets goes a long way. And that develops that strength, that baseline strength. And then we can talk about also progressing it if you move into those power or endurance phases of your training. And finally, I've written here 4 to 8 weeks. So big mistake that I see with clients and athletes is not sticking to a program or changing the program too often. So they say kind of sticking to a program from 4, 6 to 8 weeks is ideal in order to achieve that stimulus of the program, for example, right? So instead of changing the workout every week, on Monday, it's a different workout. I don't think that's the ideal to change it up every week. So sticking with maybe doing day one, repeating that for 4 weeks, and then changing it up after 4 weeks or after 6 weeks or after 8 weeks. So that's kind of my biggest advice. I get maybe with the backpack, it could get maybe a bit boring after after 2 weeks. But maybe throwing in some different variations might help. So you can manipulate the manipulate resistance, tempos, pauses, variations, progressions within that 4 to 8 week timeline there. So next, I want to talk about kind of programming and what movements should you be doing. I know we talked about specificity for swimming, but also understanding that maybe you're not swimming right now, or you're doing maybe not as much as you did before. And so also want to talk about kind of the foundational movements that every human being, not just swimmers, should learn and be proficient at. And all exercises that you see are just variations off of these 7 here. So you have the squat, obviously that's in the name. So you have maybe a bilateral squat with a barbell, with a dumbbell. Push, you have a push up or bench press. Your pull movement would be like a row that I showed earlier, or a pull up. Lunge, obviously it's in the name. You can do reverse lunge, forward lunge, a lateral lunge, throwing in some different variations, obviously, like I mentioned before. A hinge would be kind of a Romanian deadlift or a deadlift movement. The carry or core, like I mentioned before, carry would be maybe a farmer's walk or a suitcase walk or anything like that, carrying a heavy weight in your hand and walking with it. And then finally, the 7th one is rotation or anti-rotation. So maybe a standing band rotation movement you can incorporate into your training that would cover that last foundational movement as well. And then finally, the next part too, uh, once you've covered the basics and become a proficient at those foundational movements, maybe within post 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 16 weeks, you can start to incorporate some specific movements. So let's say, in 4 months' time, you're going to get back in the water, for example. So maybe you can start to progress it and try and retrain those patterns that you did a couple months ago when you were in the water, for example. So that could look like stroke work with some bands. So freestyle, whatever you want to work on. Flutter kicks on your back, like I mentioned before. Squat jumps into streamline or broad jumps or single arm or single leg work. You can kind of progress those foundational movements a little bit more and make them more specific to what you would do in the water. So I think there was a question about kind of doing stroke work with the bands. I think that's awesome, especially if you can do an activation, that'd be even better. And for maybe power, med ball slams, band work, I think is a great idea that you can incorporate, but I wouldn't say that's the number one way to develop strength. I think focusing on these movements first, and then working your way towards more specific swim specific movements, I think would go a long way for you. Another question that I got was a difference between sprint versus distance events. And so there is some differences, and a big part of kind of determining programming wise is identifying these key performance indicators or KPIs. Um, so it's taken some time to get to this point, just spending more time talking to Coach Don, working with Amber as well, and determining what are some key performance indicators that each event or a sprint versus a distance, and um, what can we do in the weight room and even in the water to enhance these KPIs. So the first one for sprint would be time to 15 meters. So you have your start. So from reaction time to push off, from pushing off the back plate, the flight phase from when you leave the block to when you hit the water, underwater to breakout, and then that time to 15. So that's a big indicator of total race time. And so that's one way that we can break down the movement, break down that KPI, and develop parts that we can, I guess, affect in the weight room. So for example, start pushing off the blocks, right? We need incredible amount of horizontal leg power. So that would be your broad jumps. But before you even do broad jumps, you have to develop that leg strength first, right? For example, underwater kicks, right? Being able to have that mobility, being able to have that hip strength, building that kicking ability as well, I think is really important. The other component is stroke performance, so the rate and force. So we can do upper body power and speed work in the gym to develop that. Again, in order to work on that power, we need some relative strength before we even get there. For distance events, obviously in a 400 versus 800 and a 1500, there's a lot of turns. So what can we do in the weight room to enhance that performance in the water? So it would be the approach into the wall, core strength in order to get into a tight tucked position, and then being able to push off the wall and be consistent amongst these longer race times. The second is stroke performance. So we have stroke rate, length, and count, and being able to be consistent with that. And then VO2 kinetics. I won't bore you with the physiology of that, but that is essentially elevating oxygen baseline consumption levels before you even start your race, for example. So being able to start with a higher VO2 when you start the race is more beneficial for you when your VO2 is low and it takes maybe 2-3 minutes in order to reach a steady state level, right? Especially within a 400, 800, 1500 meter, you need that as much time as you need. You want to be able to minimize that time it takes to reach a steady state. So using a warm up or using developing some components in the weight room or in the pool is very essential for improving VO2 kinetics as well. Okay, so then programming within a week. So what would that look like? So maybe let's say you're swimming 3 to 4 times per week. I know that may be a bit different now. And so that's why I recommend maybe doing some dryland conditioning as well. So going for a walk or a hike or run, bike, row. You have a couple options here. You can do kind of a continuous steady state training. Also doing intervals. One example would be 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. You can throw in different variations, 1 minute on, 30 seconds off. So you have some variety in the intervals that you can use in order to develop that aerobic capacity or endurance. I know nothing is like swimming, so but you can do as much as you can to minimize that decline as well. Let's say you're also incorporating 2 to 4 times per week of strength or power work. And starting out, maybe if you're just starting out, I would recommend 2 sessions per week, and then slowly working your way up into that 3, even 4. 4 would be kind of the top level of that. And the third part is active recovery. So that can be defined as light physical activity that is less intense than your regular workouts. So that can include massages, mobility workouts. So that essentially increases circulation in the lymph, the blood, oxygen throughout the body, and it allows the body to recover better and faster without necessarily loading or challenging the body or the muscles. And so I think there was a question about kind of difference between should we be doing yoga or how many times a week of yoga. I think yoga is awesome and it definitely works that flexibility. I think another component is mobility. So you may have seen a few exercises that I showed earlier, like kind of that sideline T-spine opener. Again, that is mobility is the ability to move freely and easily without pain. So the lack of mobility is when you're restricted either with stiffness or pain. And so that goes beyond then what static stretching is. So I think having a combo of kind of holding position, static stretching, as well as kind of your dynamic stretching or mobility work, I think would go a long way within your week. And that can also include kind of walks, a light bike ride or a hike, just to get that blood flowing. I think it's super important to incorporate those type of active recovery days. And then finally, the fourth, I think complete rest days are needed, and take some time away from the pool or from the gym completely. And I think especially the athletes that I work with, and you could probably relate as well, is being able to focus on other aspects of your life and spend time with family and friends or develop other hobbies. I think from a personal experience, being so involved with soccer for so long, like 18 years, being able to take a few days off, 1 to 2 days off away from the field or the gym really helped me develop my career. And I was really big into music as well, so I got to focus on that a little bit throughout my university career. So I would recommend those kind of active recovery or rest days a lot, especially for yourself or if you work with any younger swim athletes as well. Oops. Okay, so some take homes. So wrap it up. Hopefully I've convinced you the importance of a preparation and activation or warm up and how to create your own activation with the components we talked about. Again, you don't have to throw in like all of the exercises. Maybe try doing a couple of shoulder work, not just kind of arm swings, but maybe the ones that we mentioned. Try a couple of exercises before you get in the water, see how it feels. I've heard a lot kind of testimonials from athletes and clients saying how much better they feel when they do an activation versus when they don't. So I think it goes a long way, and just start small, keep it simple, and you'll definitely see the benefits from it in your performance training and competition. The second take home is the core and differentiating between superficial and deep core training. Hopefully you've taken some examples that you can start to incorporate. It doesn't have to be even an activation. It could just be as part of your strength training program as well. And finally, strength conditioning programming. So some considerations for either in home or in the gym. And so what are some qualities that swimmers need to complement their training in the pool? So hopefully I provided some guidance and support on that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions on any of these things that we talked about. So I want to thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen. And I'm happy to answer any questions here or even after this discussion. I've listed my contact info here, so feel free to reach out about any services or programming that I provide, and I'd be happy to chat. I also offer kind of free consultations, phone calls that we can chat more about and see how maybe we can work together or even how I could support you. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Meena. That was, I'm tired. I'm tired just hearing all that program right there. But
Here, I'll stop. There we
good,
go.
Good. You touched on some of the questions that came in. Is there anybody that has a question right now? All right.
Just looking through the questions right now. Yeah. Some restrictions on activation on deck. Yeah, I totally get that. How many times a week do you recommend? Kind of some how to work maybe. It's hard, obviously, if there's restrictions. Can't really do a whole lot on deck, so I totally understand that. Dean, maybe have any suggestions? Maybe you can, I don't know if you're allowed to maybe just even do a couple standing up, like it doesn't have to be on the floor. Yeah, that's a hard one for sure. Definitely have to be creative in how you program that, and work around that too. So, and how many times a week do you recommend? Is that for strength training? For strength training, starting out with 2, working your way up to 3. YTIs, perfect. So I don't think there's any more questions. But any questions right now?
There's one about breaststroke.
Oh.
How to strengthen. I think there was one that just came in. Yeah. Help with breaststroke, prevent imbalances and strengthen properly. So.
For breaststroke, more specifically, a lot of hip mobility, a lot of hip mobility and glute strengthening for sure. I've definitely seen that working with breaststrokers before. Yeah, hip mobility, number one thing that you could do for yourself. Another question, programs might vary as we get older. I guess as we get older, programming, I wouldn't say there is a whole lot to change, as long as there's no injuries or restrictions that come into play. And yeah, there's just considering those kind of injuries or past history, I think is really important. I don't think need to vary too much from what we discussed here. Again, I've worked with kind of older population. I work with a group of ladies twice a week who are 60 plus, and we're able to do pretty much everything that maybe I would program for a younger client or athlete as well. So, and they would tell you, don't change anything for me. And I'm like, okay. So that's awesome to hear. But yeah, that would be the biggest thing, is just considering any injuries or any restrictions that might affect.
Yeah, some about the same routine 2 to 4 times a week. Do you vary? Is there some variations? Obviously, variety is the spice of life, especially for masters. They need to have that spice of that variety piece.
For sure. So I would say, yeah, the 2 to 4 times a week. Let's say you're doing strength training twice a week. So you have a day 1 program and a day 2 program. So maybe on day 1, you do squat, push, pull. Day 2, you do hinge, core exercise, and a rotation exercise, for example, right? So maybe stick with day 1, day 2 for 4 weeks, for example, and then you can change up those days. And then again, seeing how you feel. I guess the 4 to 8 weeks is kind of a guideline, but you can even change it up 2 weeks. But it's just about that consistency. I think that is really important, and not changing it every day or every so often, for sure. If that answers your question.
Yeah. I think that covered a lot of the questions that came in. You did a great job on that. And I guess one of the things, I guess, takeaways, does anybody have other ones? Do you want to speak up or anything like that? I just have a couple takeaways from what you said. I liked your idea. Yeah. Is anybody?
There's a question about spacing between swim and strength sessions. Yeah. How much time is required for recovery from strength sessions? That's a good question. That's something that I've recently researched about. And generally, let's say, for example, with OSA, we would have a swim session, and then right after they would do a strength session. So just based on of scheduling, that was kind of the only way that we could do things. But you want to have maybe 1 to 2 hours in between, and that goes to incorporating some type of nutrition intervention as well. So if you can get something in to eat, a carbohydrate, a protein, I think that would be well off. Again, the research that I looked at too was 3 to 6 hours between sessions. I know that may not be ideal for everybody here. Maybe you might do a strength session in the morning and then go swim in the afternoon. That would be ideal. So 3 to 6 hours is ideal, but if not, you're not able to do that, I would say give yourself maybe an hour or two. Get yourself something to eat, and then I think that would be more of an optimal scenario. If you were doing 2 workouts per day, would you rather do weights or swim first? Yeah, so that's a good question too. It kind of depends what the goal of your training program is. So if you want to, I know it's kind of not the best answer, but depends on if you want to develop your your swimming performance. Maybe um, doing your swimming first, and then your weights. And then some research has shown maybe doing weights before swim is also optimal, is you're not fatigued. Again, it's kind of different scenarios. For example, if you're doing a strength session before your swim and during the swim you're doing some very high technical work, right? Again, you're fatigued, muscles are fatigued. That may not be the best option. But let's say, for example, you're doing a strength session, strength and power, and then in the water you're doing some speed and power work. That's an ideal combo right there. And I don't think you need to have too much time in between, because that might prime the system in order for the swim. So it kind of depends on what your focus is. Your focus is for your training as well as the swim more specifically. I hope that answers your question a little bit. It's kind of a long. It depends.
Okay,
Okay.
now I'm gonna put my 2 cents worth in here, right? Just
Okay.
because I know a little bit about these master swimmers and everything else, and there's a wide variety and so on and so forth. But I think you've provided a great basis here, Meena. One of the things would be, I would suggest start small and then work towards improvement and progression, right? And that's with frequency and all that type of stuff. But I would suggest mobility is the biggest thing, because you don't know it yet, but as you get a bit older, your flexibility, you don't get more flexible.
Yeah.
And when you die, you really aren't very flexible at all because of rigor mortis. So really important to put on that. The core piece is super, super important. And I said earlier, when the swimmers were off for the period of time they returned, and with the pretty well focused Dryland program that Meena provided to the swimmers, a lot of it was around core. It was a lot of things that they normally wouldn't do because they're swimming so much. They had time to do that, and they've returned. And I do believe they've returned in a relatively over the period of time when they were swimming without injury, without the issues that you hear about with shoulders and lower back and things like that. So, this is very important. And then Meena has some great things with recovery around with the roller, the rollers and the what do you call it, the lacrosse ball, all those things that can help. And those are the things I think if we do another one of these is looking at how might the master swimmer improve themselves. And a lot of it is on the recovery piece with you mentioned active recovery, but with the roller, with the lacrosse ball, a few other things, taking the time to do that invisible training. The invisible training is what you don't do when people are watching you. And so, but yeah, I think that's the big thing. Keep it balanced. Jack pointed out that he's going to do the Y's and the I's and the W's and the A's, and that's what's going to get him to be that much better. And you know what? As simple as that is, that will make a huge difference, especially in the backside and the strengthening of those shoulders and achiness. So good stuff, Meena. Lots in an hour, that's for sure.
I know we could probably spend a whole hour on the activation piece or hour on the strength and conditioning side of things. So
yeah,
I'd be happy to expand even further in other workshop webinars.
Well, that's part of our planning, and I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who's the chair of the Masters Committee. I think we've done a fairly good job. Like I said, this is the 4th webinar. getting into last week or last time it was around nutrition. Before that was the inside your emotions in your head, and this time around the body part, and all those pieces are very important. So, slide it over to Katie.
Meena, thank you so much on behalf of Swim Ontario and the Masters Committee and everyone who attended today. We want to thank you for talking about this important area with us. You provided clear and simple and very practical ways for us to work on activation and build strength. And I think we all feel better prepared and inspired to work on this important but often neglected part of our training. I think your lessons are important for everyone here, but for those of us, myself included, who are in lockdown and don't have access to pools, they're particularly important. And I know I've made a commitment to making this, using this as an opportunity to work on strength and conditioning. So this is very timely for us in particular. And then finally, on a professional front, we want to wish you well in all that you do, but especially in your work with as you prepare athletes for Olympic trials and then for Tokyo 2021. And we look forward to seeing your athletes in the pool, and they'll be an inspiration to all of us.
Thank you very much.
The great session.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. So it'll be up on the website. So there was a lot of information, so you can always go back to it. And the other thing is that we will have another topic in January. I think we're looking at tentatively January 17th. That's a Sunday. And again, it'll be a focus in and around training ideas. So always things to learn. We never stop learning, right, Meena?
Yep. Yep.
All right, everyone. Thanks very much. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Meena. Thanks, everyone. Be good, be safe, and do all the things that we're supposed to be doing so that we can correct this mess that we're in, and that we can get on with what the things you love to do, and that's swimming. So, all right. Thanks you, everybody. Take care.